what's the word, taxed, I guess, by that's just normal life rhythms, right? So we get to a Wednesday, it's a good time to kind of recharge the batteries a little bit. So we're going to do that tonight in Isaiah 46. I told you if you were here last week, we're going to spend 3 weeks in Isaiah. So this is the second message from Isaiah, and we're going to be in chapter 46. I mentioned last week that the book of Isaiah is a collection of Isaiah's prophecies, which were recorded. And when we read through Isaiah, you know, it's not really sequential or chronologically arranged. It's just kind of these prophecies were recorded and then basically put together. And God inspired that process, but they're not chronological. And so we can just sort of jump and grab a encapsulated prophecy. And that's what we're going to do here in Isaiah 46. Now, the topic that the chapter addresses, that it highlights, is the topic of security. And it's going to encourage us, it's going to remind us how big and good our God is and how our security is found in Him, which is a theme we talk about often around here at the church. But to get us started and to kind of get our minds prepared for that type of encouragement, I want you to think with me about the forms of security that we as modern Americans look to in our lives. So I want you to brainstorm with me a bit. There are a variety of forms of security that we appropriately look to, that we have in our lives, that we give attention to. So what would some of those be? Can you, and maybe if I give you some categories, if I tell you, okay, physical security, what types of ways do we work and endeavor to secure ourselves physically or our material things? Say again? Work out physically. Okay, so that would be something for us physically in terms of our body. We could, some people practice martial arts of one form or another for like physical safety. Did someone say house or housing? And I'm thinking of, when you say house, I think of home security, like a home security system. We have security systems on our cars. What about financial security? What are some ways that we try to secure our finances? Yeah, we have insurance and probably a variety of insurance policies for different things, whether it's our house, our car, enough life insurance. What else? Yeah. The police department, okay, we look to the police for a form of physical security and safety. Yeah, very good. What about relational security? Everyone wants to feel secure in relationships, and when we say someone is insecure, what are we saying about someone when we say they're insecure? Okay, there's maybe a lack of trust in a relationship. They don't feel safe, or they don't feel, one way to say it would be they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, maybe, if we're talking about someone who's insecure. And of course, everyone craves human security of one form or another, human relationships that are trusting and healthy, right? So we could go on and on. There are a variety of, I was kind of brainstorming, and I thought of a whole bunch of examples. Financial security, job security. We talk about social security, and some of us have been paying into it and hope there's something left by the time we get to that age. Social security, retirement accounts, 401ks, IRAs, and so there's all these different ways by which we try to secure ourselves. And the existence of all these different forms of security that we look to, the existence of those things tells us really two things. One, we live in an insecure world, a world in which there are threats and dangers in all these areas. And that's doubtless, right? I mean, it's absolutely true that there are dangers in terms of threats to our finances and threats to us personally and relationally and threats to us physically, threats to our material things. There are no shortage of threats. We live in a fallen world with one sinner surrounded by a lot of other 7 billion sinners, right? So it's an insecure world, and we want security, we crave it, and we seek to attain it. And there are a variety of ways by which we seek to do that, as we've been talking about. Well, in this section of Isaiah, this prophecy, Isaiah is prophesying regarding the form of security that the Israelites were tending to look to and the form of security that they desperately needed. And so if you're someone who likes to keep an outline, if you're taking notes, there'll be a simple outline tonight, just two points two headings. One is idols fail, and two is God prevails. Okay, so a little rhyming there. So idols fail, God prevails, and that's the name of the message and the study that we're going to be engaging in together tonight. I want to start by reading the preceding context in chapter 45 and just catch the end of that chapter and look here what God says about himself at the end of Isaiah 45, all right? This is in verse 22, "Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. I have sworn by myself, the word has gone forth from my mouth in righteousness and will not turn back, that to me every knee will bow, every tongue will swear allegiance. They will say of me, only in the Lord are righteousness and strength. Men will come to him, and all who are angry at him will be put to shame. In the Lord all the offspring of Israel will be justified and will glory." So here's this proclamation that God is the sole righteous one and the one with omnipotent strength, and he makes this proclamation, announcement to the whole world in verse 22. Look to all the ends of the earth. Look to me and be saved. I am God and there is no other. There's no other God. Idolatry is the worship of a false god of one form or another. And at that time, idolatry often looked like the worship of a false god, typically with a name. And what we're going to encounter in chapter 46 is two of the gods of Babylon. So begin reading chapter 46 with me, where it says in verse 1, "Bel has bowed down, Nebo stoops over." Now we're going to talk about what that means, but for starters, let's talk about these two gods. When we think about idols and idols that fail, there are two highlighted here, the god Bel and the god Nebo. Now these were two of the more prominent gods in Babylon. Bel was the god of the sun, the god of light and provision. Nebo was the son of Bel, god of learning and writing. And these gods are the gods whom the kings in Babylon, that you probably have heard these names before, these two kings were named after. Belshazzar, I've heard that name, right? And Nebuchadnezzar. Well, Belshazzar is named after Bel, and Nebuchadnezzar named after Nebo. So these were two of the more prominent gods in Babylon, and these were gods who were trusted in for the prosperity of the people of Babylon, for their flourishing, for their military success, for their agricultural and financial success. These were two of the more prominent gods they looked to for their security. And when Isaiah was prophesying at that time, Babylon was secure, was powerful. They were a centuries-old empire, long-standing, ever-growing, ever-thriving, and I would say seemingly invincible. The word seemingly is important because they were not invincible, but seemingly invincible, an extremely powerful people in Isaiah's day. And what he is predicting here, and what we're going to see some details about in this prophecy, is God, through Isaiah, is predicting that they will fall. That though they look invincible, they are not invincible. Like any other human being individually or collectively as a nation or an empire, no matter how strong, temporal. So in this prophecy, after God has said, hey, look to me, I am the true God, there's no other God, I am the real source of righteousness, the real source of security, he says, these false gods, Bel and Nebo, they will be destroyed. So he says, Bel has bowed down, Nebo stoops over. You may or may not recall, but in that prior context we looked at, he talked about everyone bowing down, swearing allegiance there in verse 23. Well, these gods themselves will bow down before the true God. And then he says, their images are consigned to the beasts and the cattle. The things that you carry are burdensome, a load for the weary beast. They stooped over, they have bowed down together. They could not rescue the burden, but themselves have gone into captivity. So he says, look at these gods to whom the people looked, and for a long time the people believed this methodology was working for them. They were trusting in Bel, trusting in Nebo, trusting in their other gods and their military leaders and their other leaders, and things were going well for a long time. Well, he's saying here, well, at some point it's not going to go well for them. Now, it's future, it's looking to the future, but he's just saying that this is what's going to happen. So we could ask, okay, were these gods worthy of the people's trust there in Babylon? Of course not. Did they seem like they were worthy of trust for a long period of time? Yeah, it seemed that they were worthy of trust for a period of time. Again, it was working. One historian, listen to what he says, how he describes Babylon at that time. He said, the Babylonian Empire which served these deities was so strong as to be invincible. It carried its cruel sword into all nations and piled up dead bodies of men in heaps. It was therefore dreaded in every part of the world, and not without cause. What kingdom or empire could stand against it? If you had gone to Babylon and seen its mighty walls, its lofty towers, its engines of war, its wonders of art, its multitudes of heroes, you would have thought that the worship of Bel would endure forever, and that the image of Nebo would stand there to be adored by mortals as long as the world existed. I mean, it had this feeling of complete security, and like, this isn't going to change. Like, stability and strength and lasting power. And then he goes on to say, but these idols, always a mere deceit, prove themselves powerless in the day of trial. Because Cyrus came, the Euphrates was dried up, the empire of Babylon ended, and the gods were discredited for all remaining ages. Now again, this would happen in the future, but what the historian's talking about and what Isaiah is prophesying about is the fact that Cyrus, the king of Persia, will rise up against Babylon, and they will destroy and plunder the Babylonians. So just when you think there's no one stronger, someone else stronger comes along. You maybe have heard that when it comes to all different aspects of our lives, whether it's athletics or in the business world, there's always someone contending for your position, right? There's always someone faster, smarter, stronger. There's always the next man up. Well, same here. There's another empire, the Persian Empire, which will destroy and decimate the Babylonians. But at this time, when the prophecy was given, that was almost unimaginable. You wouldn't have conceived of that happening because of the apparent stability of the Babylonian Empire. But he says they're going to fail. And so he uses this graphic imagery where he talks about, I mean, you could literally picture the physical images that they would have, the icons of Bel and Nebo that they would have. And he says they stoop over, they bow down. They can't rescue the burden of the people. And then if you jump ahead a little bit to verse 5, look what he says there. We'll come back to verses 3 and 4 in a second. But jump ahead to verse 5. He says, to whom would you liken me and make me equal and compare me that we would be alike? Those who lavish gold from the purse and weigh silver on the scale, hire a goldsmith and he makes it into a god. They bow down. Indeed, they worship it. They lift it up upon the shoulder and carry it. They set it in its place and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot deliver him from his distress. So there God, the true God, is mocking the false God, saying, think about this. People craft these things, then they themselves have to pick this thing up, serve it, and move it from one place to another. It can't talk. It can't hear. It's powerless. It's nothing. They're as one commentator said, they're beingless beings. Like they're beings without real being. They seem to be something, but they're really nothing. It's like the idea in Ecclesiastes we're looking at of vanity or vaporous. There's just nothing to them. It's false. It's counterfeit. And he says they're going to bow down. They're powerless. They cannot save. They cannot deliver. So here's the question, and I like to think in terms of knowing that God is working in all of our lives, all the time. When we experience insecurity of one form or another, or fear, or anxiety, or could be mixed with anger of some kind, where is it? What is God exposing? Like, what are we looking to? What are we trusting in? We don't have images to bow down to like they did in those days, or at least not in the same way. But we have all different things we look to. And as I said earlier, it's appropriate to have things like insurance policies and things like that. Absolutely appropriate. But what this text is familiarizing us with is the idea that we humanly, we tend to look to those things for ultimate security when they're destined to fail us. They can't secure us. They can't provide for us what we need. They can't be God for us. And so I thought of some different examples. Our jobs, our education, the company we work for, are these things ultimately secure? Are these guaranteed to see you tomorrow? Our checkbook, we have numbers go up, numbers come down. Sometimes they're going up and that feels good. They're coming down, that does not feel good. Investments of all kinds, numbers on the page again that go up and down and fluctuate, can be here one minute and gone the next. Family members even, the people that we love the most and that are a gift to us, but nevertheless are finite and limited and cannot secure us in the ultimate way. Our physical health is fragile, isn't it? So where is your security found? And we could ask the questions, okay, if we're trying to determine where are there bells and nebos in our lives, one way to get at it would be to ask, what am I most afraid of losing? Or if I've already lost it, what am I most angry about losing? What do I feel as though I can't live without? What keeps me up at night? What's the last thought I have before I fall asleep? Or maybe I don't fall asleep because I'm tossing and turning all night. Or if I do fall asleep, what's the first thought I have when I wake up in the morning? What's consuming me? Charles Spurgeon said this, and this is really, he just had such a way with words and such insight. He said, anything that you make your confidence instead of God will fail to bear your burden and will itself become a burden to you. That's the way these gods are being described. They're a burden to you. They're not carrying you. They're not taking care of you. You're going to have to take care of them. You're going to have to carry them out. And what really happened was the Persians carried them out as plunder. So what good are they? So he says, instead of it's carrying you, you will have to carry it. Instead of it's taking your load, it will increase your load and become at last an intolerable curse. The more deep-rooted these idols are, the more damage they do. So it could be just a passing sense of anxiety or fear or something like that, or it could be a plaguing, ongoing, like clinical form of those things. And then we're talking about something that's really deep-rooted. The message here in this prophecy is that all idols, and there are countless of them. One of the reformers said that the human heart is like an idol factory, just constantly cranking out new ones. And I've said in the counseling realm, it's kind of like, you know the game Whack-A-Mole? Anyone ever played the Whack-A-Mole game in the arcade? If we think that we're going to be able to just conquer idolatry in our lives, I mean, picture that Whack-A-Mole game. It's like, okay, you hit one down, and another one comes up over here, and you hit that one down, and another one comes up over here. And it's like, it just keeps happening, right? And so, because the fallen human heart is that way, because that is, as Romans 1 says, that is our natural inclination, is to worship the creature more than the Creator who is blessed forever. Because that is the case, there will not be any limit to the number of idols that we concoct in our minds, oftentimes not even aware of it. And so what God is saying here is, I am exposing those things. I am showing you what you're trusting, what you're valuing, what you're deriving your sense of security from. And if he does that, if he exposes in that way, what would his motive be? Why would he do that? Idols fail. It's inevitable. They all fail. That's the bad news. The good news is, and here's point 2, the good news is that God prevails always. We read those verses at the end of chapter 45, which are powerful verses where God just says, look to me, there's no other God. I am the only God. And then look at verses 3 and 4 now of chapter 46. because he's talking now to his people, knowing that they were fearful of the Babylonians. Some of them were no doubt tempted to put their trust in the Babylonians. When the Babylonians were kind of bearing down on the southern kingdom, there would be this temptation to kind of like say, kind of like Stockholm syndrome. Well, okay, maybe they'll take care of me. Yeah, they're going to carry our people off, but maybe they'll take care of. Well, he's saying, look, listen, Israel, listen, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, in verse 3, you who have been born by me from birth and have been carried from the womb, even to your old age, I will be the same. Even to your graying years, I will bear you. I have done it, and I will carry you. I will bear you, and I will deliver you. It's a lot of I wills, right? It's God saying, I will take care of you. I have taken care of you, and I will take care of you. You've been born by me from birth and carried from the womb. Makes you think of Psalm 139, where the psalmist says, for you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. So you see, he's talking about his care, his tender care, his provisions, his security that he has granted you for your very physical existence from the beginning to the end. Every day having been determined, our days being numbered by God. So we are secured. So we're looking at God's prevailing here. Well, one of the ways he prevails is by securing our survival. Maybe you've heard it said, we are basically, physically speaking, though we have ailments and things, we are invincible in terms of our mortality until God says it's time for us to go. He has determined that. It says that in Psalm 139, that all the days that were ordained for us were written. Before we even existed, God had determined how long. Isn't that, is that encouraging to you? With our own natural preoccupation with our health, which is, again, appropriate in a very real sense, and in our cultural preoccupation with health, and never has that been more obvious than during the COVID season, right? The kind of obsession with it, and again, partly appropriately so, but also partly probably to an extreme and even harmful degree. And I didn't plan to go here necessarily, but it is interesting to me when you think of Bel and Nebo being the god of learning and writing, and how we tend to put our trust in physicians and the experts in these areas. And yet if you've dealt with them enough, and if you have discernment, you can probably tell that, there's a lot they know and there's a whole lot they don't know. And they're not omniscient. And oftentimes, or maybe I should say sometimes, maybe oftentimes, more harm is done than good when we put our trust in the intellectuals who supposedly know everything and can save us. There's again, this is all off the cuff, this is just for free. There's a book I read a few years ago which was fascinating to me. It was written by the chairman of the Board of Psychiatry at Duke University, or maybe formerly the chairman of the Board of Psychiatry there. I think he's retired now. He wrote a book called Saving Normal. And in that book, as an insider, as someone who practiced psychiatry and was a professor of psychiatry, and someone who examined the kind of the whole history and the evolution of medicine in America, both for mental issues and physical issues, he came to this conclusion. We're getting out of hand with all of this diagnosis of every single ache and pain, psychologically, physically, and all the pharmaceuticals and all the prescriptions. And he just said, the underlying presupposition that is deceptive behind that is what he called the delusion of the perfectibility of life, as if somehow life can be perfectible. Like if you are over 50 and you think you're going to live somehow without any kind of ongoing chronic pain, you're not in touch with reality. Like the real world that you actually live in, these things happen. And he's saying a lot of what drives this whole industry is this delusion, and people just follow like sheep and just keep buying and adding more and more and more. And he's like, it's because they've believed this, they've been sold a bill of goods here concerning what's possible. It's not possible. There's going to be pain. There's going to be brokenness. Why do I say that? We put our trust in lots of these experts, and again, oftentimes it's really helpful, but it's not always helpful. And what God reminds us of over and over and over again is, look, I have your life in my hands. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that a good thing? That is a good thing. Our lives are in His hands. He determined way before we even came into this world how long our lives would be. He determined the family that we would be placed within, the context, where and when and who we'd be surrounded by. All of that determined by God. Makes us feel small and highlights this amazing security of a good God who secures our physical being in the ultimate sense. Well, let's look next at how He secures our surroundings. And that's in verses 8 through 11. So look what he says here. After, again, mocking the false gods, upholding Himself as the true God, He says this in verse 8, remember this and be assured. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things long past, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is no one like me. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. Calling a bird of prey from the east, a man of my purpose from a far country. Truly I have spoken it. Truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it. Surely I will do it. I mean, it's amazing. God saying, in the whole context of human history and in the storyline of our lives individually, He has determined our surroundings. He's determined everything that will happen. He's declared the end from the beginning. There's mystery here. Of course, we are creatures with free will. We make decisions all the time. So it's not that we're robots, that there isn't free will, but He's saying, in the end, like, I'm so good at what I am doing that in the end, my purpose will be established and cannot be thwarted. There's nothing that humans can do, nothing the most powerful people can do, nothing some god or false god can do to stop me. It will go the way I determine for it to go. Which would be terrifying if not for the revelation of God's heart and who we know Him to be, right? And what His motives are and what He's doing. And glorifying Himself and redeeming and rescuing and securing His people. So it's good to know that we're in, is it Allstate? You're in good hands, right? You're in the best hands, like possible. And no one else has this level of control or power or wisdom. No one else has the ability to execute their plan with this level of perfection. So God secures our surroundings. God secures our salvation. Chapter 46, 12 through 13 here. Just the end is this idea of salvation. And there's some interesting things to observe here as well. Listen to me, you stubborn-minded, who are far from righteousness. Let me pause there. This is contextual. Earlier in Isaiah, God, through the prophet, says to His people, hey, look, I know you're going through the motions here. You're giving sacrifices. You're keeping some of the rituals and routines that I've prescribed. You're doing those things, but your heart is far from me. Well, here, He's speaking to them in a similar way, saying, you're stubborn-minded. You think you're righteous, but you're actually far from righteousness. Because at that level of the heart, you're not seeing my all-sufficiency for you. You're still trusting in so many other things to secure you. Even tempted to trust in the Babylonians, your enemies, over me. He's like, remember who I am. I'm your good father. I've been the one taking care of you from the beginning. Have I ever been disloyal? Have I ever failed you? So he says, you're far from righteousness, because what would be right would be for them to trust him implicitly. And that would be right for us too. But we don't often, all too often, we don't find ourselves there. And so here's the good news. Look what God says. I will bring near, what? Do you have it in your, I don't know, in your translation, but what's it say? I will bring near my what? My righteousness. It is not far off. And my salvation will not delay. And I will grant salvation in Zion and my glory for Israel. If it were up to you, Israelites, if it were up to you, Cornerstone Church members tonight, if it were up to you, there would be no salvation. If it were up to me, there would be no salvation. But he says, good news, I'm bringing salvation. I'm bringing my righteousness to you. Now, if you were here last week, I said, we think of certain passages in the book of Isaiah as being messianic in nature. Isaiah 53 is one of them. The Christmas verses in chapter 7, verse 14, a virgin will conceive and have a son. And Isaiah 9, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. We think of those. From beginning to end of this book, though, it is all pointing to Christ. And when he says here, I'm bringing my righteousness near, my salvation will not delay. Well, where do we see that fulfilled? Where do we see the manifestation of that? In Jesus coming, right? Living in, think of this, subjecting himself to all the threats and all the dangers of this insecure world. Being tempted in all the ways that we're tempted. And while we turn to other people and possessions and positions, we turn to all sorts of things to try to secure ourselves, Christ in his life trusted his Father at every moment, even when everything went sideways, even in his darkest hours. We have there our substitute, the one who is righteous, the one who trusts his Father from beginning to end. And God is here even foreshadowing or predicting the granting of righteousness, the rescue of righteousness, the salvation of our souls. And it is when we contemplate our own insecurity and we struggle with all the types of things we struggle with, financial security and physical insecurity and relational insecurity, and all those ways that we struggle. Manifestations of that fallen mind that's still independent, still seeks to establish itself, still having a hard time trusting God, and to know that Christ is for us, that he covers us, that his record has, that God views us as if we've always trusted, which is amazing, that we're viewed that way, that our status is that status of righteous in Christ. And to know, as it says in Romans 8, if he didn't spare his own son, will he not also with him freely give us all things? He has demonstrated his securing love for us through Christ. We've talked about all these different forms of security. Job security, social security, home security, personal security, relational security. And now we're talking about eternal security, the greatest form of security, eternal security, which has been granted. Amen. So, before we spend a little time, do a little bit of question and answer. Before we do, I just I mean, think with me about this, all right? This is going to be maybe a little bit morbid, but bear with me for a second. So I want you to picture yourself. You're on your deathbed, all right? I know, again, it's negative, it's morbid, but just come there with me for a moment, all right? So you're on your deathbed. You're lying there in a hospital, staring up at the ceiling, feeling weak, in pain. You know your life is leaving you. You're lying there waiting for the inevitable, waiting to breathe your last breath, waiting to die. Are you secure? All of a sudden, no other form of security really matters that much, right? Your finances, your home, and your family, I mean, matters, but I mean, you can't stop what's happening. Or any other kind of security. In that moment, it's crystal clear that all idols fail. You with me? At that point, the only thing that means anything really is you're standing with God. At that point, only God can prevail. Only God can give the type of security you so desperately need, that eternal security. And in Christ, God declares to you that you have that kind of security. The value of that, you cannot estimate. We are so enthralled, and we're all guilty of this. And as I said earlier, it's not like we're going to be able to, it's like the whack-a-mole thing. It's not like you're going to be able to just fully conquer this in your life. We're going to continue to struggle with this, okay, until we're home, because it's that part of our nature still with us. So there are all sorts of ways that we just value and appreciate and trust in and try to derive security from so many things. And what has us really secure is our great God. He's demonstrated his love for us. He's proven it to us through Christ coming, facing death himself, and then rising from the dead. So if there's resurrection, I mean, wow. There's a pastor and author that I appreciate. Don't agree with everything that he says, but I appreciate him. His name's Timothy Keller. I think Pastor Rob has mentioned him as well as some good books he's written. Well, you may or may not know, but he has cancer. I believe it's pancreatic cancer, and he's hanging in there, but I mean, I believe at some point it's bound to be terminal. Well, he was being interviewed recently and was asked about what he would say to the young generation. They were not talking about his situation, as difficult as it is. They were talking about the young generation and how filled with fear and anxiety the young generation is. And so the interviewer asked Pastor Keller, hey, what would you say to the young generation when they look to the future and they're just horrified, just terrified, petrified regarding the future? What would you say to them? And he said, wow, there are a lot of things I probably could say. He said, but the one thing that is probably most important to say is, if Jesus rose from the dead, and he said, and I believe he did, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that he did, chief among them being God said that he did. If Jesus rose from the dead, then it's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. So bring with me right now, just sort of like, okay, what is it? What is it you're feeling insecure about? What is it that's got you frustrated, anxious? Where is that insecurity? And just hear God say, I bring my righteousness near, my salvation is here, I've rescued you, you're taken care of, I've determined the end from the beginning, even what you're going through right now, I wrote that into the story, I have a good plan for it. You might feel like I'm not anywhere in the middle of that, but I'm there. And as Jesus said, he who lives and believes in me will live even if, or we could say, even when he dies or she dies. That is amazing, powerful, valuable truth, isn't it? As Paul said, boy, if these things are not true, then we are of all men most miserable. Because we have tasted of something that's like amazing. And if it's not true, man, it's unbearable to even think of if it's not. But he says it is true. And so we have this great hope. Because Christ rose from the dead, and we will too. That's our eternal security. It's good. All right, let's pray, and we'll do a little Q&A and then break up for prayer groups, all right? Father, thank you so much for Isaiah 46, one of countless chapters in your word which point us to you and your kindness, reminded of your exclusivity as the only true God. And we're so grateful that you are, because of how you are filled with loving kindness and compassion, with the kind of strength you have and the kind of wisdom you have and the knowledge you have. You could do so much harm, and yet your heart is to redeem and heal and collect your people together into your sheepfold, into your family. And knowing that we live in all these ups and downs in this fallen world with insecurities of all kinds, you just keep showing us in all different ways that you have us, that you're for us, that you're with us, even when things go badly, even when things are painful, when there's loss, when there's seemingly insecurity of all kinds, or the props that hold our lives up have been knocked out and we're wobbling relationally or financially or physically, to hear these words and be reminded that you are for us, that you have us, that your salvation has already covered for us, has already secured us. We thank you. We thank you for this. We thank you for everyone you've brought tonight and the encouragement that we've been able to share in together, and pray in this next few minutes that we would continue that encouragement, and then in the time of prayer that also would be encouraging and life-giving, even as we reflect on and marvel over Christ and who he is and what he's done. In his name, amen. Amen. Okay, so any thoughts or questions? We have a little time. Maybe let's take 5 or so minutes for that, and then we'll break up into groups. Anything at all? Maybe it's all kind of been said. I said a lot, so has it been said? It's okay if it has. Anything at all? Okay, 30 more seconds of awkward silence before I quit on the idea. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
So the beginning of that chapter, thou bowest down, those stoops, those are like small e gods. Is that, obviously, you don't have your faith in them for too long before you find out that they fail, right? So in that time, in Isaiah's time, what was it that made them worship these things?
Yeah. Well, it really goes all the way back to Genesis, where when Adam and Eve, this is kind of a deep thought for the moment. I'll try to keep it concise and express the way I understand it. But when you think of Adam and Eve, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were deciding to be their own God, essentially. It doesn't use that terminology explicitly, but when he says, that you would know good and evil, be like God, it does, I guess, say it that way explicitly. So it's like they're putting themselves in the place of God. But here's this problem. If you're a human being and you sit in the seat of God, as it were, you got this problem because you're actually a very dependent creature still. You may think you're God in some way, and you can be the God of your life and make your decisions and everything else, but the reality is, without food, water, other people, shelter, you die. So a human being living as their own little sovereign still needs provisions of all kinds. So now, if my fallen heart says, well, I'm not going to have that God to rule over me, the true God, then I've got to come up with other sources for those things. And so I'm going to attribute those provisions and the blessings and benefits of my life to some other god that I'll make up, that I can also negotiate with. Because, and you know how that was with their idolatry, with the pagan worship. They would sacrifice and do things for that god, and what would the god do in return? Well, nothing, but they thought, this is what they thought. That's a good point. The God did nothing. That's a great point. But they thought they were negotiating and could control their life that way. We do these things, we make these sacrifices, and then that God causes there to be rain. Or the sun shines and our crops grow. And so it was all a big delusion, but they thought this was the negotiation when they were in, and this is what humanly they wanted. And by the way, this is what humanly we all kind of want, and that's why we got to beware of the tendency within the church even to shrink God down. And that's why when Rob and I are constantly talking about God's character, God's heart, God's grace, God's sovereignty, it's because there's this human tendency in all of us to shrink him down. And if we lose sight of grace, we think we're in this sort of negotiation with him. It's that same idolatry stuff. Well, if I do these things for God, then he's going to bless me. If I do these things for God, then he's going to make my family be just the way I want it, or make this or that go just the way I want it. And no, he's big and he's big and powerful, and he's wise, and he's not under your thumb in that way. So your question is what made them keep? Well, it's nature. It's our nature.
Just denying the real God.
Yep.
They can make it like an easy street.
Yep. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah, Harry? Yeah, it's like that moment. It's like that. You ever heard of a? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Insurance, whatever it is.
Yep.
It can be a form of a God that will only, like you said, your deathbed, it's nothing.
Yeah, ultimately destined to fail, all of them. And as I said, for a lot of years and for generations, they believed Bel and Nebo were doing exactly what they thought they were supposed to do. They were securing them. They were prospering. Yeah, this is working great. But at some point, it's time to pay the piper. At some point, it's come to Jesus moment. You ever heard that expression? It's like reality check. Reality is you thought it was this way, but actually, nope, it's this way. And that's where the Bible is very clear about that the truth will come out at some point. And that is a version of the truth coming out. Because the truth is, they're just statues. Like God said, they got eyes they can't see, they got ears they can't hear. They're not doing anything for you. At some point, God will prove that. And everybody will bow down, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That's foreshadowed in Isaiah 45 in the section we looked at earlier. Everyone will swear allegiance that he is the true God. Hand over the mouth with all those other delusions and deceptions, right? Anything else? Any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that to say that we can ever really overcome the tendency for idolatry?
Remember, Paul says, I've learned the secret of contentment. You remember he talks about the secret of contentment? I think, is it in Philippians? I believe what Paul is saying there and what that passage is getting at, which we do have tastes of, which is this, we have tastes of contentment as we reflect on the truth of Christ's all-sufficiency, and that in Christ we are complete and full and lacking nothing. In those moments of clarity, which thankfully we have, and the Spirit opens our eyes to see and to believe, and we have those moments of contentment. And Paul, when he says, I have learned the mystery of contentment, he doesn't mean I learned that mystery and now I'm content all the time from now until, he keeps confessing, hey, Romans 7, I keep struggling. Other places, I'm the chief of sinners toward the end of his life. It's not like he conquered it. He just means I get now the principle. That's the truth. The truth is, I don't need any more than I have. So he says, whether I have a lot or I have a little, at that point, I think it's one of his prison epistles. I believe it's Philippians. And he's basically saying, and right there in the context, he's talking about having a lot or having a little. He's saying, I've learned the secret of contentment is I don't need beyond what I have. Now, does that mean he always experienced or felt that? I don't believe so in light of other things he said, and I don't think we will either. But ought we strive and desire and endeavor to lean into that truth? Absolutely. And that's why we get together to remind each other of that truth. So then we hear it, like, oh yeah, that's right. You know? So, yeah. Okay, yeah, Doug.
Any thoughts on what you think are the biggest idols in Christianity today?
Oh, man. 7:52. I mean, I have thoughts of my own. I mean, I have lots of thoughts on that. We should probably, I'll just say briefly, the tendency is there in all of our flesh and our fallen minds to continue to concoct idols of all forms. I think one of the ways we do that is we do try to kind of negotiate with God. And I know for me, there was a season in my life, and it's ongoing learning in this area, but there was a very profound season in which I was realizing, oh my goodness, I am just like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son, where I am the good guy who's done everything, quote unquote, the right way, but I really just wanted the stuff from God. I was in this negotiation relationship where I was like, okay, God, you're going to bless this, you're going to bless my marriage and my finances and this and that and the other, and my whatever, health. And I was in a season in which everything seemingly was falling apart and my plan was not working. I do think, and I talk about in my biblical counseling and training that I've done, a term that I don't know if I coined it or someone else coined it, doesn't matter, but what I call the biblical ideal idol. The biblical ideal idol, meaning, hey, I can look to Scripture and see where a husband and wife should love each other, or children should honor their parents, or a church should grow and thrive in a certain way. And I could say, well, hey, that's what's supposed to be. The Bible describes that. The Bible even prescribes that. And so now I have a right to that. And now I can strive after that. And in this really subtle way, I'm engaging in idolatry because I'm putting that, whatever that created thing or created experience, even though it's a church experience, it's a sanctified experience in some way, I've still put it in the place of a God who says, you know what, sometimes I let stuff just go differently. Sometimes I have a plan for things unraveling and not going the way you want them to. There's no guarantee that a family is going to be intact. But if I'm thinking everything has to be a certain way, then I start controlling my family, and I'm instead of reading this book to discover the amazing grace and redemption of God, now I'm using this book as like a tool to try to get people to do what I want them to do. That's not the point of this book. You're chasing the biblical ideal idol. Like an ideal of a certain kind has now become your idol. And all the wreckage and damage by self-righteous people, such as myself, as that season of discovery was taking place, I was realizing, wow, this is the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son. I'm the good guy. I never left my father's house. I'm doing all the right things. Yeah, for all the wrong reasons. So I think there are all different ways we can do that. There's no shortage of ways that we can do that. And it is by the grace of God that He exposes to us the ways in which we are doing that. And He keeps showing us, hey, this is where you're going. This is what you're treasuring. This is what you're trying to get. And this is who I am. And this is what I've done for you. And you have everything you need. And that is the point. And so He just keeps exposing idols. And like a surgeon with his scalpel just cuts into the heart and say, let's see what you're... And as things are kind of going the way we don't want, it's this opportunity. Okay, wow, what are you really clinging to? So I think there's countless ways by which we do that. I think that too, like what we just talked about with contentment, will be something we struggle with till we die. And I think that highlights the importance of what we're doing right now, which is coming together, looking at what God says and being reminded, oh yeah, that's what's true. Does that make sense? Jill, did that make sense? Kind of. We'll talk on the way home. You can tell me if it really made sense. I know you don't want to embarrass me right now, but that's a huge topic. So maybe we can get together at some point, Doug, and talk more about it, and I can try to be more clear. But in this context right now, I'm trying to be concise. But there's are you guys with me at least on the ability to keep like concocting new idols? Like, you with me on that? The whack-a-mole thing? Is everybody with me on that? Okay. All right, good. If nothing else, we can all just go to Chuck E. Cheese after this if it's still open. I don't know. Still exists. Play some whack-a-mole. Okay, let's break up, guys, into your groups, prayer groups, all right? And just enjoy some time sharing requests and praying for one another.